Walk into a typical American evangelical church on Sunday morning, and you'll experience something remarkable. The music is contemporary, often with a full band and light show. People raise their hands during worship. The pastor wears jeans and speaks passionately about a personal relationship with Jesus. The service feels emotional, energetic, spontaneous. Now imagine walking into a traditional church in England, France, or Germany. The building is centuries old. The liturgy is formal and ancient. The congregation is small, aging, and quiet. The pastor wears robes and reads prescribed prayers. The atmosphere is reverent, structured, solemn. These two experiences represent Christianity, the same faith, the same Bible, the same Jesus, yet they feel like completely different religions. American Christianity is louder, more emotional, more individualistic, more entrepreneurial, and dramatically more conservative than its European counterpart. Americans attend church at rates 3 to 4 times higher than Europeans. Americans are more likely to believe the Bible is literally true, that hell is real, that Jesus is the only path to salvation. American Christians are more politically active, more culturally influential, and more missionary-minded. Meanwhile, European Christianity, which gave birth to the Protestant Reformation, which built the great cathedrals, which sent missionaries around the world, has become largely cultural rather than devotional. Churches stand mostly empty. Faith is private rather than public. Religion has been pushed to the margins of society. So how did the same faith develop so differently on opposite sides of the Atlantic? Why is Christianity thriving in America while fading in Europe? What historical, cultural, and political forces created two such distinct expressions of the same religion? This is the story of two Christianities, and what their divergence tells us about faith, culture, and modernity. To understand why American and European Christianity are so different today, we need to go back to the beginning, to the very different circumstances under which Christianity developed in each place. In Europe, Christianity arrived gradually over centuries, spread by missionaries and eventually adopted by rulers and kingdoms. By the medieval period, the Catholic Church had become the dominant institution across Europe, more powerful than any king, controlling vast wealth, dictating the rhythms of daily life. This created what historians call Christendom, a society where church and state were intertwined, where everyone was baptized as an infant into the faith, where being European meant being Christian. Religion wasn't a choice. It was simply the water everyone swam in. Dr. Elizabeth Harris, composite character, historian. In medieval and early modern Europe, you couldn't separate religious identity from social identity. You were born into a parish. You were baptized as an infant. You attended Mass. You paid tithes to the church. You were married in the church and buried in the churchyard. This wasn't about personal faith or individual choice. It was about belonging to a community and a tradition. But in America, Christianity developed under completely different circumstances. And those circumstances would shape American religion in ways that still echo today. The earliest English colonists in America, particularly the Puritans who arrived in New England in the 1620s and 1630s, came specifically for religious reasons. They were religious radicals who felt the Church of England hadn't gone far enough in its break from Catholic tradition. They wanted to create what they called a city upon a hill, a pure Christian community that would be a model for the world. This was revolutionary. Unlike in Europe, where religious institutions were inherited and established, American Christianity would be intentional and chosen. Reverend Thomas Mitchell, composite character, theologian. The Puritans brought with them a very different vision of what Christianity should be. They emphasized personal conversion, biblical literacy, strict moral discipline, and the idea that they were God's chosen people with a special mission. These themes, personal choice, biblical authority, moral purity, divine destiny, would become central to American Christianity. But here's what's crucial. Even as different Christian groups came to America, Anglicans in Virginia, Catholics in Maryland, Quakers in Pennsylvania, Dutch Reformed in New York, they all operated without the support of a powerful, unified church institution like existed in Europe. There was no American archbishop with the power of the Archbishop of Canterbury. There was no American pope. Each colony developed its own religious culture, and within colonies, different congregations competed for members. This created religious diversity and religious competition from the very beginning, something almost unknown in Europe at the time. And then came the American Revolution and the First Amendment, which separated church and state completely. No established national church, no government support for religion, no mandatory tithes, just freedom to practice any religion or no religion at all. Dr. Harris. The First Amendment created what we call the free market model of religion. Churches couldn't rely on government support or automatic membership. They had to compete for followers. They had to be appealing, relevant, engaging. The churches that survived and thrived were the ones that could attract and retain members voluntarily. This is the first major difference between American and European Christianity. European Christianity was established and supported by the state. American Christianity was voluntary and competitive from the start. And that difference would shape everything that followed. The religious competition of American Christianity created something else distinctly different from Europe. Revivalism, emotional, experiential, transformative religion focused on personal conversion. In the 1730s and 1740s, a wave of religious fervor called the Great Awakening swept through the American colonies. Preachers like George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards held massive outdoor revival meetings where thousands gathered to hear passionate sermons about sin, salvation, and the need for personal conversion to Christ. People wept, they shouted, they fell to the ground in religious ecstasy. They described dramatic conversion experiences where they felt God's presence directly. This was Christianity as emotional experience, not just inherited tradition. Reverend Mitchell. The Great Awakening introduced a style of Christianity that emphasized feeling over ritual, personal experience over institutional authority, conversion over tradition. You weren't a Christian because you were baptized as an infant and went to church. You were a Christian because you'd had a personal, emotional encounter with Jesus Christ. This revivalist tradition would be repeated again and again throughout American history. The Second Great Awakening in the early 1800s, with its massive camp meetings on the frontier. The urban revivals of the late 1800s led by evangelists like Dwight L. Moody. The Billy Sunday revivals of the early 1900s. The Billy Graham Crusades of the mid-1900s. The charismatic movement of the 1960s and 70s. Each wave reinforced the idea that true Christianity was about personal conversion and emotional experience. That faith should be felt, not just believed. That church should be exciting, moving, transformative. Compare this to European Christianity, particularly after the Reformation. Yes, Europe had its own religious fervor during the Reformation period. But by the 1700s and 1800s, European Christianity, both Catholic and Protestant, had settled into something much more formal, ritualistic, and institutional. Dr. Harris. European churches emphasized tradition, liturgy, sacraments, theological education. Faith was about participating in ancient rituals, affirming historic creeds, being part of a tradition that stretched back centuries. There was much less emphasis on personal conversion or emotional experience. You learned the catechism, you attended Mass or services, you followed the church calendar. This created a profound difference in what Christianity felt like. American Christianity became increasingly emotional, enthusiastic, and focused on individual experience. European Christianity remained formal, liturgical, and focused on corporate tradition. And here's what made this difference even more stark. The Industrial Revolution and modernization affected the two continents very differently. In Europe, as cities industrialized and populations moved from rural villages to urban centers in the 1800s and early 1900s, people lost connection with their parish churches. The old rhythms of rural religious life, the village church at the center of community, broke down, and the formal, institutional churches struggled to adapt. But in America, revivalist Christianity adapted brilliantly to modern conditions. Churches became entrepreneurial, using new technologies, new marketing techniques, new organizational models. They met in theaters, in tents, in storefronts. They used radio, then television, then the internet. They created programs for every demographic: youth groups, women's Bible studies, men's breakfasts, singles ministries. American Christianity became modern while European Christianity remained traditional. And in a rapidly changing world, modern and adaptable proved more sustainable than ancient and unchanging. There's another crucial difference between American and European Christianity: immigration. America has always been a nation of immigrants, and with each wave of immigration came religious diversity and renewal. Irish Catholics in the mid-1800s, Italian and Polish Catholics in the early 1900s, Eastern European Jews, Chinese and Japanese immigrants bringing Buddhism. More recently, Hispanic Catholics and Pentecostals, Korean Presbyterians, African evangelicals, Middle Eastern Christians fleeing persecution. This constant influx of new religious communities has kept American religion vital, diverse, and competitive. Dr. Marcus Santos, composite character, sociologist. Immigration creates religious vitality in several ways. New immigrants often hold their faith more intensely than native-born populations. Faith becomes a connection to home, to identity, to community in a new land. They build new churches, create new congregations, bring new energy and commitment. This constant renewal prevents the stagnation that can affect older, more established religious communities. Look at American Catholicism as an example. In the mid-1900s, as white ethnic Catholics became more assimilated and suburban, Catholic practice declined among them. But massive Hispanic immigration from Latin America revitalized American Catholicism. Today, Hispanic Catholics are a majority of American Catholics under 40, and they're much more likely to attend Mass regularly than their white counterparts. Or look at the explosive growth of Korean American churches, which are some of the most vibrant Christian communities in America. Or African immigrant churches, which are bringing new energy to evangelical and Pentecostal traditions. Europe has also experienced immigration in recent decades: Muslims from North Africa and the Middle East, Eastern Europeans, Africans. But for complex reasons including language barriers, discrimination, and different immigration patterns, this hasn't revitalized European Christianity in the same way. Dr. Harris. European nations have struggled to integrate immigrant religious communities. Partly this is because European Christianity is so tied to national and ethnic identity. To be German historically meant being Lutheran. To be Italian meant being Catholic. To be English meant being Anglican. When immigrants arrive with different religious backgrounds, they're often seen as foreign to the national culture in a way that doesn't happen as much in America, where religious diversity has always been part of national identity. This brings us to another key difference: the relationship between national identity and religious identity. In Europe, Christianity is deeply intertwined with national history and culture. The great cathedrals are symbols of national heritage. The state churches, the Church of England, the Lutheran churches of Scandinavia, the Orthodox churches of Eastern Europe, are part of national identity even for people who never attend services. But because Christianity is so tied to cultural identity, it becomes something you inherit rather than something you choose. You're culturally Christian, even if you never pray or read the Bible. The churches receive state funding and maintain their buildings and traditions, but they lack vitality because membership is automatic rather than committed. Reverend Mitchell. In many European countries, people will say, "I'm Christian," when asked their religion, but what they mean is, I'm culturally part of the Christian tradition of my nation. They were baptized as infants, they might get married in a church, they'll have a church funeral. But they don't attend services, they don't pray, they don't read the Bible. Religion is heritage, not practice. In America, by contrast, Christianity is less about heritage and more about choice and practice. Because there's no established state church, because religious diversity is so great, being Christian means actively choosing to identify that way and usually actively participating in a church community. This means American Christianity has less cultural Christianity but more active, committed believers. The numbers are smaller in terms of percentage of population, but the level of commitment is much higher. Perhaps the most fundamental difference between American and European Christianity is how each society has dealt with secularization, the process by which religion loses social and cultural significance. European secularization has been dramatic and thorough. In countries like the Netherlands, Sweden, and France, regular church attendance is now below 10%. More than half the population identifies as non-religious. Religious education has been removed from public schools. Religious symbols have been banned from public spaces. Religion has become almost entirely private and personal. Dr. Harris, European secularization followed a particular pattern. As societies modernized, industrialized, and became wealthier and more educated, people simply stopped going to church. They didn't necessarily become atheist. Many still believe in some kind of God or spiritual force, but they stopped seeing institutional religion as necessary or relevant to their lives. This process accelerated after World War II. The devastation of two world wars fought primarily in Europe, the Holocaust, the development of strong welfare states that provided social services once provided by churches, rising education levels, increasing prosperity, all of these undermined the social necessity and cultural dominance of Christianity. Why go to church for community when you have robust social networks? Why depend on church charity when you have comprehensive government welfare programs? Why accept church teachings on morality when you're educated and can think for yourself? Why believe in divine providence when science can explain natural phenomena? In Europe, the answer increasingly became you don't. And so the churches emptied. But America took a different path. Despite similar levels of education, wealth, and modernization, American religious commitment remained high. Even today, about 40% of Americans attend religious services regularly, 4 times the rate in most of Western Europe. Why the difference? Dr. Santos, this is called American exceptionalism in religious studies, the fact that America is the great exception to the secularization theory. The theory predicted that as societies modernized, they would inevitably secularize, becoming less religious. That happened in Europe, in Australia, in Canada, in Japan. But not in America. America modernized and yet remained deeply religious. Why? Scholars have proposed several explanations. Some point to the free market model of American religion because churches have to compete, they stay relevant and adapt to changing needs. European state churches, protected by government funding and cultural tradition, became complacent and stagnant. Others point to America's weak welfare state. In Europe, governments provide comprehensive social services, healthcare, unemployment benefits, pensions, childcare. In America, these services are limited, and churches help fill the gap. Churches provide social networks, charity, community support, things that government provides in Europe. Still, others point to American individualism and optimism. European history, marked by devastating wars and the loss of empires, created a more tragic, skeptical worldview. American history, marked by expansion, prosperity, and victory, created an optimistic worldview that fits well with Christianity's message of hope and salvation. Reverend Mitchell. There's also a theological dimension. American Christianity emphasizes personal choice, individual responsibility, and divine blessing on America. This fits with core American values of freedom, opportunity, and American exceptionalism. European Christianity, with its emphasis on tradition, community, and often more tragic theology, fits less well with modern individualism. Whatever the reasons, the result is clear. Europe and America have followed dramatically different paths through modernity. Europe chose secularization. America chose continued religiosity, though of a distinctly American type. And this divergence has only accelerated in recent decades. While American Christianity faces challenges, declining church attendance among young people, the rise of the knowns, it remains vibrant compared to European Christianity. European churches face existential crises. Should they sell their magnificent but empty cathedrals? Should they accept full inclusion of LGBTQ individuals to attract younger members? Or maintain traditional teachings? Should state funding continue for institutions that serve such a small percentage of the population? American churches face different questions. How do we remain relevant to younger generations? How do we navigate political divisions? How do we address racial and social justice issues? But American churches are asking these questions from a position of relative strength, with full pews and active communities. European churches are asking their questions from a position of weakness, struggling to survive. The differences between American and European Christianity aren't just institutional and cultural. They're also theological, differences in what Christians believe and how they interpret the Bible. American Christianity, particularly evangelical Christianity, which represents about a quarter of the American population, tends to be theologically conservative. Most American evangelicals believe the Bible is the inerrant Word of God, true in every detail. They believe in a literal hell where unbelievers go after death. They believe Jesus is the only path to salvation. They believe in the reality of miracles, including the virgin birth and bodily resurrection of Jesus. Dr. Sarah Weinstein, composite character, theologian. American evangelicalism emphasizes biblical authority, personal salvation, evangelism, and often premillennial theology, the belief that Jesus will return soon to establish his kingdom. This creates a sense of urgency, a belief that we're living in the end times, that souls hang in the balance. It's a high-stakes, black-and-white theology. European Christianity, by contrast, has been more influenced by liberal theology and biblical criticism. Many European Christians, including clergy, don't interpret the Bible literally. They see it as inspired but human, containing both divine truth and cultural limitations. They're more likely to embrace universalism, the idea that God will ultimately save everyone, and less likely to believe in a literal hell. European theology tends to emphasize mystery, ambiguity, and the limits of human understanding. American theology tends to emphasize certainty, clarity, and the reliability of biblical revelation. These different theological emphases create very different religious experiences. American Christianity often feels confident, assertive, and evangelistic. European Christianity often feels humble, questioning, and introspective. Reverend Mitchell. American Christianity tends to provide answers. Here's what the Bible says. Here's how you should live. Here's how to be saved. European Christianity tends to ask questions. What might this text mean? How do we understand God in light of modernity? How do we hold faith alongside doubt? Neither approach is inherently superior, but they reflect different cultural contexts and different ways of engaging with faith in the modern world. The theological conservatism of American Christianity has also made it more politically conservative. Since the 1970s, American evangelicals have been deeply involved in politics, pushing for policies aligned with their theological beliefs, opposing abortion, defending traditional marriage, promoting religious freedom, supporting Israel. European Christianity, with its theological liberalism and cultural marginalization, has much less political influence. European Christians are more likely to emphasize social justice, environmental stewardship, and peace, but they do so from the margins of society, not from positions of political power. Perhaps nothing symbolizes the difference between American and European Christianity more than the megachurch. In America, churches with weekly attendance of 2,000, 5,000, even 20,000 people are increasingly common. They meet in buildings that look more like corporate campuses or shopping malls than traditional churches. They offer services in multiple styles, programs for every demographic, professional music, sophisticated technology, coffee shops, bookstores, even fitness centers. These megachurches represent the ultimate expression of American religious entrepreneurship, churches as businesses, pastors as CEOs, worshipers as consumers choosing from competing religious products. This model is almost entirely absent in Europe. European Christianity remains rooted in parish structures, ancient buildings, and traditional liturgies. The idea of church as a religious marketplace competing for consumers feels foreign, even crass, to European sensibilities. Dr. Santos. The megachurch phenomenon reflects several distinctly American characteristics: entrepreneurialism, individualism, consumerism, emphasis on personal experience and emotional satisfaction. Europeans tend to value tradition, community, and historical continuity over innovation and personal preference. The megachurch model succeeds in America because it aligns with American cultural values. It would struggle in Europe because it violates European cultural expectations about what religion should be. The megachurch model has been criticized, even within American Christianity, for being too commercial, too focused on entertainment, too shallow theologically. Critics say they provide religious feelings without demanding much sacrifice or transformation. But defenders argue they meet genuine needs: community, relevant teaching, practical help with modern life challenges, and yes, inspiring worship experiences. They point out that megachurches often provide extensive charitable services and missions work. Whatever one thinks of megachurches, they represent something distinctly American: the marriage of faith and capitalism, of ancient beliefs and modern marketing, of spiritual seeking and consumer choice. Nothing comparable exists in European Christianity, and it's hard to imagine it ever developing there. The cultural, social, and historical contexts are simply too different. So why is American Christianity so different from European Christianity? It's not one reason but many, layered across centuries. It's the free market model versus state establishment. It's revivalism versus liturgy. It's immigration versus ethnic homogeneity. It's weak welfare states versus strong ones. It's optimism versus tragic realism. It's biblical literalism versus liberal theology. It's entrepreneurship versus tradition. American Christianity evolved in a uniquely American context. A nation founded on freedom and opportunity, built by immigrants seeking new beginnings, expanding across a continent, rising to global dominance. American Christianity became confident, assertive, innovative, and culturally powerful because that's what succeeded in the American context. European Christianity evolved in a very different context. Ancient nations with long histories, devastating wars, declining empires, strong states providing social services, high levels of education and secularity. European Christianity became modest, questioning, traditional, and culturally marginal because that's what survived in the European context. Neither form of Christianity is necessarily more authentic or more faithful to the gospel. They're simply different expressions of the same faith in vastly different contexts. Each has strengths and weaknesses. Each has something to teach the other. American Christianity could learn from European Christianity's intellectual sophistication, its comfort with doubt and mystery, its emphasis on social justice over political power, its respect for ancient tradition. European Christianity could learn from American Christianity's vitality and relevance, its ability to attract and engage younger generations, its enthusiasm and emotional warmth, its missionary zeal. As both continents face new challenges, increasing secularization, religious diversity from immigration, political polarization, cultural fragmentation, perhaps the greatest lesson is this: Christianity has always adapted to different contexts while maintaining its essential message. The question isn't whether American or European Christianity is right. The question is how Christianity in all its forms can continue to speak meaningfully to human needs for meaning, community, transcendence, and hope in an ever-changing world. The differences between American and European Christianity tell us not that one is right and one is wrong, but that faith takes shape within culture while also shaping that culture. And that's a story that will continue to unfold on both sides of the Atlantic for generations to come.